Hey there, James Davis again, here with the DFSR NBA Bootcamp, and today I'd love to talk to you about something absolutely critical to follow up on our cash game article, and that is assessing injury risk. Now, I nodded briefly to how you should be thinking about injury risk in terms of cash games, but I didn't really empower you to assess that injury risk for yourself, and that will be the focus of today's video. The first thing when it comes to assessing injury risk, it says it right there. I didn't even want to bury the lead for you. That is religiously refreshing Twitter. RRT. You absolutely have to do it leading up to lineup lock. Unlike other sports, like say baseball, where we'll often have the lineups in an hour before the games are actually set to play, no sport runs out these last second injury updates like the NBA. Now, supposedly going forward, they're going to have a stricter policy around this. I'm not going to take anything for granted. I'm going to be on Twitter trying to check out the latest things released by the beat writers, by analysts like ourselves, the coaches, everyone who's out there. Sometimes the players themselves can give us some insight. So being on Twitter, following the right people, or following an outfit like ours at Daily Fantasy SR can really help you get all the information you need. It also happens to be the toughest thing, and that's why our commitment here at DFSR is to have one of our expert NBA analysts there every single night, refreshing Twitter religiously on our own and updating our minutes projections as a result of what we're reading there. Now, going from there, so Twitter only brings you so far, and trying to assess what you're getting on Twitter is oftentimes the next most important thing. So the thing we always advise people to do is look into what the coaches are saying, but also pay attention to what the coaches have done or are doing. And coaches can kind of lead us in all sorts of crazy directions. For the most part, anytime a coach offers up any sort of hesitancy, that's a red flag for me. Phrases like, he's going to test it out and see how it goes, or he's going to, run on it on warm-ups and we're going to figure out where to go from there, or he might split time, or he might, not play out the first quarter quite that much. Coaches will say all sorts of things. Any amount of hesitancy other than, yeah, he's good to go, man, he'll be out there, is going to put up a red flag. Now, that doesn't mean a player is absolutely unplayable, but this is one of the things that I'm going to be looking for most, because ultimately, the time a player spends on the court is only at the mercy of his coach. And if we ignore what they say, I think we do so at our own peril. The next point, especially as a player is returning from injury, is looking at how long he has been out. Now, there are players like Anthony Davis who will be out for a game here or 3 games there with these ticky-tack, finger, face, just these random little injuries. For things like that, I'm not going to ultimately be too concerned. A lot of times a player will miss a game because of quote-unquote injury, when really it was kind of like a built-in rest night, or they never really wanted to play them the full 40 minutes that night, and then they'll be back and good to go. On the flip side, to start this season, Paul George is missing between the first 10 games and 2 months of the season with a shoulder injury. In a case like that, I'm going to be a lot more cautious. There's no chance in his first game back that I'm just going to plug him in and go. So basically, the longer a player has been out, the more cautious I'm going to be in employing him in his first game back. And for me personally, I very rarely do that in any case, assuming that I have other similar or even slightly worse on-paper matchups. The next question is, what are the team's alternatives? This especially matters for teams that happen to be playing for something, and for those teams that have an absolutely critical piece that they're trying to put out there. So you can expect late in the season this year, if LeBron is a little bit banged up heading towards the end of the year, but the Lakers are right there vying for the 1 seed, or heaven forbid, just trying to get into the playoffs or for home court advantage, you can bet that he'll be out there, because the alternatives to LeBron James are not very good, right? On the flip side, if you switch over to a different team and you're talking about, say, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander on the Thunder, a team that many people don't have as vying for a playoff spot this year, and you think about the alternatives, sure, SGA is going to be a better player than Terrence Ferguson or Andre Roberson or whoever the alternates are in terms of kind of what he brings to the table. But it's not that different, and the team really isn't playing for that much. So if he was on this injury radar of mine heading into the season, I'd probably just take a wait-and-see approach. Even if my model told me that SGA was an automatic play at 30 minutes or something, it just doesn't take very much for an injury risk guy to come down from 30 minutes to 25, and all of a sudden, I'm totally screwed. Now, I think there's this great misnomer that you only are hurt if a guy misses the game completely or leaves the game early with injury. injury can cause so many other problems besides that. Those injured guys really are the first guys to come out when the game gets even the littlest bit out of hand. They're going to be pulled more aggressively if they get into foul trouble. Injury is just a storm cloud hanging over our DFS prospects. So that's why I tend to be as conservative as possible. The last question is, what's on the line? Now, a basic examples of where you'd have two totally different situations would be during the playoffs last year, right? I mean, we saw Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson play on injuries that there is no way they would have played during the regular season. And yet for DFS purposes, they would have been perfectly acceptable plays, because you know that if they're suiting up and heading out there on the court, the team's alternatives are much worse than them, and there's so much on the line that they're just going to have to be out there, right? And this works other ways too. It not only works for injury risk, but it also works for potential blowout situations. So in a game that a team is playing for its playoff life, they're much more likely to be aggressive about giving people playing time, even if they are slightly banged up, even if the game does, even if they do have a 12-point lead with 5 minutes left, because blowing the game would be so high leverage on the season that they aren't very likely to try and mess with that. The big thing that we try to do in our lineup tool is help you have a tool that allows you to not take too many chances when it comes to injury, right? So on our lineup tool, Anthony Davis hurt his finger in China, recording this still here at the beginning of the season. So if I don't want to make a lineup with Anthony Davis, I can just exclude him, right? Or what I can do is say Davis only plays, 85% of his minutes and scores 50 fantasy points. Let's see how my lineups look if I lower his projection objectively on my side, right? And you can kind of go from there. So assessing injury risk is not a binary, folks. It's not just, hey, this guy has an injury risk or he doesn't. It's a huge spectrum of things. And I think for cash games, you can generally go very conservatively and do very well. And for big tournaments, injury risk is actually a sneaky way to get separation. Say there's a 10 o'clock game that Anthony Davis is playing in, but you don't know if he's going to play as of the 7 o'clock lock. Davis has historically been a guy who plays his full run of minutes when he is out there, but occasionally sits. And like I've said before, Anthony Davis sitting is basically the same as him only scoring 40 fantasy points on a $12,000 number. But if you're one of the 3% of the people in the field that took the risk and played Davis on 12,000, and he has one of those vintage 70, 80 fantasy point nights, all of a sudden you're going to be quite happy. And you'll be able to get him at separation that you wouldn't normally be able to get a big star at. So yeah, a lot to consider. Assessing injury risk can be very different for cash games and for big tournaments, but nonetheless, in the NBA, you absolutely have to do your homework. If you can't do it, you can rely on a system like ours, which is updated to the second anytime an injury comes in, or you can hop in our members-only chat and discuss, our opinions on the different coach speak and that kind of thing. But one way or the other, you have to pay attention to injury. It's not always fun, but it is a key component to winning. Hopefully you found this video interesting, guys. And if you did, we can't wait to see you in the next DFSR NBA Bootcamp video. Peace.